So when I'm making a proficiency scale, I really want to think about the purpose. And I want to make sure I don't actually turn it into or accidentally turn it into a rubric. So I tend to set myself up like this, where I have the 4.0 and the 0.0 having very little room, because I'm not going to write anything for the 0.0 or the 1.0 at this time. And I'm not going to write anything for the 4.0 at this point because I'm not designing the things that are above standard right now. I need clarity for myself and my colleagues on what a 3.0 item is and what a 2.0 item is for this particular standard. So the standard we're using today is a high school functions standard, and it's going to be IFA 2. And what I do is I just come right into my 3.0 and I write out the entire standard, but I unpack it just like I would unpack a standard if I were putting it into a unit plan. So the same protocol, I go in front of each verb and I enter. So I have use function notation. It's the first part of the standard. Well, that is something that's a skill. The next starts evaluate functions for inputs in their domains. So I'm going to actually come down and I'm going to start again. Evaluate functions for inputs in their domains. So I'm going to be working with that. Now I actually have two separate bullets. My next one says and interpret statements that use function notation in terms of a context. Because it says and, the student actually has to do all three things to be at standard. Some of the standards will say or, and when it says an or, the faculty tend to underline it and make note of it because that or means I have a choice and the child does not have to do all of those pieces. So I'm going to give myself another bullet. Interpret statements that use function notation in terms of context. These are the three things that have to happen. So now I need to think to myself, what kind of question, what kind of task would I do or design that would have a student independently do all three of these things? And that assessment could have an A, a B, and a C section where they are doing all three in separate ways if it becomes difficult. Now here is the trickiest part of actually making a proficiency scale, so pay attention very carefully. I take all three of these items as they are. Use function notation, evaluating functions for inputs, and the ability to interpret statements that use function notation, and I cut and paste them perfectly under 2.0. Now, why do I do that? Isn't 2.0 supposed to be easier? No, that's a rubric. This is exactly the same difficulty level, but a student could use or do just one of these. Remember, for 3.0, they must do all three at once. But what if I have a question where they just use function notation? Well, then in that case, that is a 2.0 item. So in that story, I have to have an exact copy. When you're working with your colleagues, please encourage one another and help one another with this step. It becomes very habitual to come in right away and make this much easier. They'll say, well, for the 2.0, it's just recognize function notation. No, they have to use function notation, but it might be a question that only does that. But a prerequisite that I might include now would be recognize function notation. I can picture a multiple choice question where I give them different kinds of notation and I say identify which one would be used in a function. That's not at standard. It's a prerequisite. Do I have another prerequisite? Let's think. They're going to evaluate functions for inputs in their domains. Well, that's evaluating them. How about just identify inputs in their domains? If a child could do a problem doing that, then I know that they're approaching standard. If a child could do just one part of the standard, I know they're approaching standard. If a child can do all three parts, They are at standard.